The OCG just had a brand new ban list, and honestly, it's one of the most weird ban lists in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! What's potion? You got Matt here, and welcome back to another competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Video. The OCG's new ban list is just weird, plain weird. In my opinion, there are three main reasons to why it is so strange, to be honest. One of those reasons is going to be that there's just no actual banned cards, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But with that being said, if you guys are excited for this video where I go over the OCG ban list and talk about not only the implications in the TCG, but also what impact it would have if those hits were to happen in the TCG as well, then make sure to smash the like button. And of course, subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already. We're on the road to 10,000 subscribers and we can't get there without your help. But with that being said, here is why the OCG's newest ban list is so weird. So when talking about the changes to the OCG ban list, I not only wanted to go over the changes that would happen to the list itself, but I also wanted to talk about what would happen if those changes came to the TCG and also give them a ranking from 1 to 10, with 10 being an amazing hit or amazing change and 1 being a pretty bad change on the list. But with that being said, let me know down in the comments below what your thoughts are on the OCG's ban list, and of course, how happy would you be if we ended up getting these changes in the TCG as well. Starting off our discussion, we're going to talk about Tidal, Dragon Ruler of Waterfalls going to 1. This is a really interesting hit, and I think it's about time. Every single other Dragon Ruler in the OCG is now at 1 copy, and Tidal becomes the last one to join them, which I think makes so much sense. The Dragon Rulers in general are way past their prime. The last time they were seeing really any competitive play was about 10 years ago as a whole. Sure, every once in a while we'll have some random cards that pop up now and again and really take advantage of the Dragon Rulers. For example, Tempest saw a good amount of play in random Dragon variants in about 2019-2020. We're also seeing a lot of play for Blaster, Dragon Ruler of Infernos, that's happening right now in the OCG, especially in Tenpai Dragon decks, but that's only because it just so happens to be a Fire Dragon monster with a good star line. If Tidal were to see play in 2024 and beyond, it would take a very powerful water-based strategy for it to become that top tier threat once again. In my opinion, this is a 10 out of 10 change, and I would be definitely very happy if the TCG adopted this as well. Wanted, Seeker of Sinful Spoils is now at 1 copy in the OCG, and I think it's about damn time. Personally, I think all cards that are like reinforcing the army for different types and attributes or whatever the case might be should all be at 1 copy, except for like Fire Formation Tanky, but that's only because it's a continuous spell and has more weaknesses. Now, Wanted isn't actually a generic Rhoda for any specific type of card. It's a generic spell that searches for any Diabellstar monster, and right now in the TCG, we only have the one being Diabellstar the Black Witch. There are 2 others that are going to be released in the near future, but we don't have them just yet. But it's because Wanted itself represents what's basically a powerful 1.5 card combo in the form of Diabellstar to get access to all the Snake Eye cards, and it replaces itself while recycling resources. It is so strong. There's really no downside to this card at all. It can be activated in the draw phase to play around something like Droll and Lockbird. It can get Diabellstar from the graveyard. It can banish itself to be able to get back the copy of Original Sinful Spoils that's already been used to get it back into the deck and draw an additional card. There is no downside. As an individual card, it just does way too much for any strategy that wants to take advantage of level 1 fire monsters or the Diabellstar engine as a whole. The OCG was right to limit it to 1 copy, but in the TCG, I would actually argue that it's going to be very unlikely that on this upcoming list, it goes to 1. I think eventually it will get there, but not just yet. Just think about it. In the next coming sets, we have obviously the new Yubel support, we also have Tenpai Dragon, and so much more that's been competing with all these fire decks in the OCG. They haven't been as powerful as Snake Eye or Snake Eye Fire King, but they still topped a couple of events every once in a while and prevented that format from being a tier 0 format. Since Wanted's release in August, they've had not only 1, but 2 separate ban lists to try and address this card before right now. So I think the TCG is going to follow a very similar path. We had 1 ban list that went into effect in January, and I'm expecting to have another one that'll happen probably in April, which means that we should have the next one coming in maybe June or July, around the time that Nationals happens. And that's when I think that Wanted will be hit to 1 in the TCG. So while I would give the hit to Wanted to 1 copy a 10 on 10, I don't actually think it's going to happen in this upcoming list. So for that reason, I'll give it a 3 on 10. I would be very surprised if it happens so soon. There Can Be Only One, also known as Tikaboo, is now being hit to 1 copy, down from 2. It's a really interesting floodgate, especially in formats where decks are dominated by certain types. For example, Pyro, Beast Warrior, Winged Beast, whatever the case might be. There are so many players that believe all floodgates should be at 0 and banned from the game, but there are also a ton of players that believe all floodgates should be at 3 copies. Personally, I fall in the middle. I believe that all of these degenerate floodgates should be at 1 copy, just like Tikaboo is now. The problem is, in the OCG, there are so many incredible floodgates that are at more than 1 copy right now. Now, while there aren't too many different strategies that are taking advantage of Tikaboo right now, it's a preemptive hit in my opinion. We all saw how good Vanquish Soul was with Tikaboo at 3 copies. That deck itself is just inherently playing every single monster of different types, which means they're able to actually play under Tikaboo very easily, but their opponent can't. It just adds an extra piece to the end board that makes it much more threatening. In the TCG, we've had there can be only 1 at 1 copy for the past few months now, and I think people have been pretty happy with that change. But if the OCG is going to limit floodgates like Tikaboo and Rivalry of Warlords, they also have to go ahead and do the same thing for other cards like Gozen Match or Summon Limit or Anti-Spell Fragrance or all the countless number of other floodgates in the game today. Because they didn't limit all these other floodgates, I'd put this change on the list as a 7 out of 10. Moving on to the semi-limited list. First of all, in the semi-list in the OCG, they use it very differently than how we use it in the TCG. First off, in the OCG, they use it as a way to kind of hit consistency pieces of different decks or hit really powerful cards that would just be really unfun to play in the game. There are currently 20 cards on the OCG semi-limited list, including cards like Dimension Shifter, Big Welcome Labyrinth, and Emergency Teleport. In the TCG, however, we use our list slightly differently. The way our list is run in the TCG is going to be as a way to kind of slowly but surely bring cards back into the game. Think of it this way, we have Dino Wrestler Pankratops at 1 copy, it goes to 2 just to make sure it's okay and safe, and then they put it back up to 3 copies eventually. I personally prefer the OCG's model of using the semi-limited list as a way to just curb the consistency of certain strategies. I wouldn't mind if we had more hits on the semi-list than we do right now, but for the time being, we don't. But that being said, the OCG just semi-limited 6 different cards today, and we'll start with the most controversial. SP Little Knight to 2 copies makes no sense. First of all, no one in their right mind is playing 3 copies of Little Knight unless they're playing exactly Pot of Extravagance and they're worried about banishing all of their copies. Also, most players right now are playing it at 1 copy, so why did putting it to 2 copies make any sense? Are they expecting that SP Little Knight is going to be really good in this coming format because of a lack of extra deck monsters of a certain archetype? Or are they expecting Pot of Extravagance to see a lot of play as well and they want to reduce the possibility or the probability of SP staying in the extra deck after the effect resolves? I don't know, but SP to 2 still makes no sense. I'd argue the card should be either at 3, at 1, or maybe even at 0, but I don't think Konami would ever ban SP Little Knight for the time being. If they really wanted to hit SP Little Knight, they should have put it to 1 copy. That way, once you use it, you still have access to this powerful card, but when it's gone for good. The hit does absolutely nothing, and if it happened in the TCG, I would be pretty surprised. Again, in my opinion, it should be at 0, 1, or 3, and for right now, I would say at 1 copy is where it should probably be because it's that strong of a card. If you remember earlier, I mentioned there were 3 really weird things about this ban list. The first one was that there are no banned cards, and in my opinion, this here, SP to 2 copies, is the second weird thing about this OCG ban list. In my opinion, this is a 0 out of 10. I would not want this hit to happen in the TCG, and if it did, I would be very disappointed. If the World Child's Justiciar goes from 1 to 2 copies, Ib is a very strong card, but right now it's not seeing a lot of play, it's definitely past its prime. The only decks really playing it right now are going to be some weird off-center Dragon Link decks that really aren't going to be playing that well, or, more impactfully, World Child's decks, which love this card. Ib going to 2 copies does absolutely nothing because the card itself is past its prime, you can't loop the card, all the effects are hard once per turns, there's really no reason for it to go to 2 copies, it should have just gone directly from 1 to 3 copies once they realized it wasn't doing anything. In my opinion, putting Ib to 2 copies does absolutely nothing, so it's like it didn't even change at all. I'm fine with having it at 1 or at 3 copies, it doesn't make a difference for me, so for that reason, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. I don't love it, I don't hate it, and it wouldn't change anything in the TCG anyways. Pot of Extravagance to 2 copies is also very weird. I'm honestly really surprised that this card went to 2 right now because we all know that Pot of Prosperity is strictly the better card unless you're playing exactly like Labyrinth or another stun deck. But Pot of Prosperity is at 1, Pot of Desires is at 2. Why is Extrab going to 2 now of all times? It's just a really confusing hit, unless they want all pot retrains to go to 2 copies or lower to reduce consistency. I don't really understand the reason behind this at all. This one makes no sense to me. At the current moment in the TCG, we have Pot of Extravagance, Pot of Desires, and Pot of Prosperity, all at 3 copies. And if we got Extravagance to 2 copies out of anything else, that would be the most surprising thing in the world, because we all know that Desires was at 2 copies for a long time and shouldn't have been, and then a card like Pot of Prosperity is still at 3 copies when it probably should be limited to 1 or 2. Only because this hit really doesn't accomplish anything, I'll be giving it a 5 out of 10. Don't love it, don't hate it. Kaiser Coliseum is back at 2 copies. What? Okay, first of all, in the OCG, they had this card at 3 copies and we had it at 0. We've had it at 0 for like over 5 years now, and they just finally put it to 2 copies. Kaiser Coliseum is a very degenerate card in the game today. It's a really nasty floodgate that prevents your opponent from summoning more monsters than monsters you control. So if you have one really powerful invincible monster or towers-esque monster, and you have a card like Kaiser Coliseum, your opponent can't summon more than 1 monster to their field, which is not going to get the job done. Kaiser Coliseum wasn't seeing a ton of play in every single deck in the format, but it was seeing a lot of play in decks like Tenpai Dragon and even Pure Fire King. But I think the reason why Kaiser Coliseum is still legal in the OCG is partly because of Max C. If you're going first and you try to special summon a monster and your opponent chains Max C, you don't want to go full bore and just continue your combo, so you activate Kaiser Coliseum. It slows you down, but it also slows down your opponent, which means that right now you'll be in a position to have the turn come back to you after Max C is done resolving. But in the TCG, I would never want this card coming back off the list. This card should stay banned, absolutely. It is a 0 out of 10 this change in my opinion if it were to happen in the TCG. Kaiser Coliseum should never come back to our format, period. The final 2 semi-limited cards are Snake Eye Ash and Fire King High Avatar Kirin, and I'll talk about these 2 together. Snake Eye Ash is definitely the strongest card in the Snake Eye deck. It's the 1-card combo that can play through Droll, it gets any Snake Eye out of the deck, and it gets any level 1 fire you need as well. If you're playing one of the fire decks in the TCG and you see Snake Eye Ash, then you're very happy. I'm of the mindset though that in the TCG, because of how new these fire decks are when compared to the OCG, that hitting Snake Eye Ash to 1 is enough for the time being. But the OCG has had Snake Eye around for months, and all they do is limit Ash to 2 copies. I guess that's enough because they also limited Wanted, but these 2 hits don't kill the deck, and they don't lower the power level at all either. All they do is reduce consistency. Instead of having 3 Bonfire, Ash, Wanted, and Diabellstar for 12 starters, they're now reduced to only 9. But because they kept Snake Eye Ash at 2 copies, they can still have Snake Eye Ash search for another copy of Snake Eye Ash, which is a mistake in my opinion. I would give Snake Eye Ash a 7 out of 10 ranking because I'm happy it was hit, but it should have been more severe. If we got Snake Eye Ash to 2 copies in the TCG, no one would care. It would do nothing. But in the OCG, these hits to Ash and Wanted are less about hitting pure Snake Eye and more about hitting Fire King Snake Eye, which is the better strategy right now. The reason why I say it's about hitting Snake Eye Fire King is because they have a new variant of Fire King that's being pushed out, which is going to be the one revolving around Fire King Avatar Alchemic. This version of the Fire King deck doesn't need the Snake Eye variant, it doesn't need the Sinful Spoils engine, so it can play just pure Fire King from here on out. But that brings me to our next hit, which is Kirin to 2 copies. This makes sense. In Snake Eye Fire King, the ratio of monsters is similar to the TCG, with 1 Garunix, 1 Ponix, 1 Arvada, and usually 3 copies of Kirin. With only 2 Kirin, it makes it more likely that Infinite Impermanence or Effect Veiler actually resolves on its target. The probability your opponent will have a copy of Kirin to bypass the Infinite Impermanence or the Effect Veiler is now much lower. I believe that putting Kirin to 2 copies is the only realistic hit that you can give to the Fire King strategy that doesn't outright kill the deck. If Ponix, Garunix, or Island go to 0, the deck basically dies, but if they go to 1 copy, that doesn't change too much. And if Arvada goes to 0 copies, they lose negation, sure, but the engine is still completely online. The Fire King deck itself is not overly oppressive, but when you pair it with the Snake Eye cards, it becomes a problem. Eventually though, these Fire King cards will be just power creeped out of the game. But that being said, I actually really hope that in the TCG we get the same hit, so Kirin to 2 copies is a 10 out of 10 for me. That's it for the semi-limited list, now on to the unlimits. Starting off with Change of Heart going from 2 to 3 copies. This accomplishes nothing. Change of Heart once upon a time was a great card, but right now, Any effect that would target to take is not that strong, especially because it's not a quick effect. It's barely seeing play right now at 1 copy in the TCG, it's barely seeing play at 2 copies in the OCG, and it'll continue to barely see play now that it's unlimited. Infernity Launcher is also at 3 copies, meaning that deck is now at full power, and honestly, it'll accomplish pretty much nothing. It's going to be like a less consistent version of these powerful build-a-board combo decks or powerful FTK decks, and I don't think that's going to be that good right now. As for Rite of Aramesir, Supreme King Dragon Darkworm, and Girsu the Orcus Mech Knight, all 3 of these cards going back to 3 copies is a 10 out of 10. All 3 of these decks are nowhere near as powerful as they once were, and for that reason they're deserving of going back to 3 copies. And finally is Summon Sorceress. This is the third weird thing about this ban list, because Summon Sorceress, one of the most degenerate cards in the history of the game, goes from 0 to 3. We all thought that Summon Sorc would never come back without an errata. So what did it get? Well, it got an errata. The new effect is essentially an on-summon effect, where on summon, you can special summon a monster from your hand to your opponent's side of the field to the zone that this card points to. Then you can summon from your deck a monster with the same type as the monster you summoned to your opponent's field, but the effects of both monsters are negated. But then you're locked out of special summoning for the rest of the turn except for monsters of the same type as the one you summoned from the deck. That seems really restrictive, but in all actuality, it really isn't. Imagine summoning out a dragon monster or a fiend monster. A lot of the times you lock yourselves into dragon or fiends with those strategies. Any single type that eventually gets a Xeno lock will be able to take advantage of Summon Sorceress very well. I really like the changes to this card. It's still playable, it's got some good options behind it, and it's going to see some play every once in a while. And that's it, that's the list. Now OCG players have been pretty vocal about their displeasure with this list, and I think part of that is because they didn't ban any cards, which is obviously not ideal for a format that's been as long and as oppressive as this one has been for them. Now while there are a lot of really good individual hits on this list, there aren't enough in my opinion. I think they should have done a much better job of balancing the format and really taking care of all these fire decks, which I think they did a really subpar job of doing. But with that being said, if we got a few of these changes that happened in the TCG as well, I'd be okay with it. Not happy, not sad, but just okay with it. So there you have it, that's my thoughts on the newest OCG ban list, and let me know what you guys think about it down in the comments below, as well as if you have any other suggestions for possible hits you think the TCG will implement as well. You've made it this far in the video, so you must have enjoyed it, so make sure to smash the like button, and of course subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already. And if you haven't already heard, I'm giving away a copy of Promethean Princess to 1 lucky subscriber. If you want to enter the giveaway, then check out the pinned comment for more information. But as always, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.